We are looking at Tawney's explanation of Luther's invention of religion. And last time we looked at how for Luther presented a fairly new conception of religion as absolute interiority. Which religion was a form of spirituality focused on what we sometimes call heart, and this heart related to sometime Bible, the Word, sometime Jesus, and sometime conscience. But this relationship was direct. So when this heart is talking to Bible, the Word of God, which is actually revealed to this heart as if for the first time, without mediation of any corpus of knowledge or hermeneutics. Similarly, Jesus, without mediation of any institution and conscience, ultimately. So basically a dialogue of heart with itself. And as Heidegger said, that dialogue can't be anything but silence, because it doesn't refer to anything external. And there are two pillars which form the foundation of this conception: extreme purity. So everything outside is impure and dark. So the heart goes into itself more and more. And secondly, so anything external cannot be related to spirituality or religion, because that would be impure. So then you delegate everything external to the secular. Secular get the absolute power, which it always dreamt but never attained in the 1,000 years of Catholic, or 1,000 or more than 1,000 years of Catholic Church. So the notion of extreme purity, which creates basically unfathomable gulf between the heart and the external world. So heart becomes the sole focus of spirituality. And secondly, you have this notion of spontaneity. I guess it's related to the first conception, where the Christian community emerges on its own without mediation of any institutions, without mediation of any customs, without the mediation of anything, spontaneously from this pure well of heart, and it overflows. So that will happen. But seems like this is not going to happen in this world, because whatever is external is going to be impure by the assumption number one. So that's why you have created this gulf between interior and external world, which include your own body here, and society and state. So this all belong to secular. So laws would be secular, customs would be secular, etc. So they have, although they are darkness, but they have absolute power, and that's somehow sanctioned by religion as well. But religiously speaking, you only have heart, and so there can be no religious community. There can't be any religious law. There can't be any religious customs. So that's a new conception of religion which Luther invented. It was the logical outcome of this conception of. It was the logical outcome of this conception of religion, that although Luther's whole Reformation was based on freedom of Christians, that freedom of Christian didn't translate to anything except the destruction of the church, Catholic Church, because that was externality in the name of religion. So darkness in the name of religion, that must be abolished. So that was one outcome of the freedom. The second outcome of the freedom was turning back the whole institution of spirituality and religion on interiority, on your heart or on your conscience or whatever you want, on your spirit, whatever you want to call it. But you can't do anything externally in the name of this freedom of religions, because external belongs to the secular, because that is the darkness there. Even though it is absolutely bad, and because of it, religion and spirituality can't partake in it. But since we have to organize the life, that's why secular authorities have been given absolute power. So that's why he opposed the rebellion of peasants, for example, were in a sense encouraged by his plea to freedoms. And he did base on the fact that his message cannot be translated into any social reconstruction or social reformation. It has nothing to do with. And secondly, that the secular has the absolute power. And as a Christian, your freedom just belongs to your heart. Externally, you should obey the secular authority. And this religious and spirituality cannot be translated into anything outside. So that's why this passage as fully convinced as any medieval writer that serfdom was the necessary foundation of society, His alarm at the attempt to abolish it was intensified by a political theory which exalted the absolutism of secular authorities. So his freedom didn't apply to freedom of serfs because it didn't apply to the external world. And absolutism secular authorities, the belief in the absolutism secular authority emerged from a religious doctrine which drew a sharp antithesis between the external world and the life of the spirit. The religion and spirituality only belong to the life of spirits, your inside. It can't be translated into anything external. That's logically the demand of the peasant that alienage should end because Christ has delivered and redeemed us all, the lowly as well as the great, without exception, by the shedding of his precious blood, horrified him, partly as portending an orgy of anarchy, even though he is himself anarchist as far as his freedom from and destruction of Catholic Church and absolute freedom within. Outside, he is absolutist. So freedom has these two sides to it. It gives you freedom from inside, only to be absolutely bound to the secular authority externally. So so the demand of the peasant and that alienage should end because Christ has delivered and redeemed us all, the lowly as well as the great, without exception, by the shedding of his precious blood, horrified him. Partly as portending an orgy of anarchy in the external world, partly because it was likely to be confused with and prejudice, as in fact it did, the Reformation movement. Partly because, as he thought, it degraded the gospel by turning a spiritual message into a program of social reconstruction. This article would make all men equal and so change the spiritual kingdom of Christ into an external worldly one. Impossible. So then that's very important. Degraded the gospel. So the kingdom of Christ or the kingdom of God is totally internal. Doesn't have any external message. It doesn't have any. This spiritual message doesn't translate into program of social reconstruction. Logically, it shouldn't have any social manifestation, because any social manifestation, firstly, it will trample on the absolute authority of the secular, but also it will degrade the gospel's message, because anything external would be impure. And the kingdom of Christ can't be impure. So that's why. So basically, we have it's an amazing logic, but it's very enticing and has had a powerful impact on the modern world, and still people talk about it. So the spiritual is so lofty, so pristine, that it has nothing to do with. Absolutely nothing to do with this fallen world. That means that this fallen world can run by the crooks. Because, the world and the society has to go on. So making spirituality absolutely pure, in fact, makes it irrelevant, really, because if spirituality doesn't have any external manifestation, it's not going to have any internal manifestation as well, because pure interiority, is nothing really. Nothing is purely interior, because our interior is constituted by our exterior, and our exterior is constituted by our interior to a certain extent as well. So in a sense, the logical conclusion of this is to make the religion irrelevant. So, and the greatest manifestation of it is that although he totally rejected rhetorically and criticized the commercial and capitalist spirit which was emerging, he absolutely refused to do anything about it. So his social attitude, his ethical attitude towards capitalism was even more vehement than the Catholic Church. But he would have nothing to do with the tradition and custom and statute which medieval church had designed to curb those tendencies. And he was totally against it, because the religion shouldn't have anything to do with the externality here. It was the absolute realm of the secular. So in a sense, even though his rhetoric is against capitalism, his logic gives capitalism full reign. So let's look at the next. So he saw no room in a Christian society for those middle classes whom an English statesman once described as the natural representative of the human race. International trade, banking and credit, capitalist industry, the whole complex of economic forces, which next to his own revolution were to be the mightiest solvent of the medieval world, seemed to him to belong in their very essence to the kingdom of darkness, which the Christian will shun. So this capitalism is total darkness for him. But he won't do anything about it, because so resolute an enemy of license, like capitalist license, might have been expected to be the champion of law. That is the law of the church against the profiting and all that. But it might have been supposed that Luther, with his hatred of the economic appetites, would have hailed as an ally the restraints by which, at least in theory, those appetites had been controlled. In reality, of course, his attitude towards the mechanism of ecclesiastical jurisprudence and discipline was the exact opposite. It was one not merely of indifference, but of repugnance. So he rejects license, he rejects capitalism, avarice and all that. The same vehemence as the medieval church. But he also rejects the rules and regulation and customs which were erected by and instituted by the church in order to curb those things. And the basis for this, logical basis for this is, so capitalism is absolute darkness, but we can't do anything about this. Not only can't, but shouldn't, because that will degrade the religion. So fighting darkness actually degrades it. because this darkness is secular darkness. So he was happy to fight the so-called religious darkness. But he won't fight the secular darkness because that will degrade the religion. And obviously capitalism is very happy with that sort of religion. So that's why, Reformation, even though it's against, I mean, he is Luther's Reformation. There were other of his disciples, or part of his movement, who actually were pro-capitalist. Some of them were in the middle, some like Zwingli, or some of them were actually very pro-capitalist, like Calvin. We'll look at that some other time. So this is just fascinating because so on the one hand you have a capitalist industry, the whole complex of economic sources, which next to his own revolution were to be the mightiest solvent of the medieval world, seemed to him to belong to, in their very essence, to the kingdom of darkness, which the Christian will shun. But on the other hand, so resolute an enemy of license might have been expected to be the champion of the canon law. It might have been supposed that Luther, with his hatred of the economic appetite, would have hailed as an ally the restraint by which, at least in theory, those appetites had been controlled. In reality, of course, his attitude towards the mechanism of ecclesiastical jurisprudence and discipline was the opposite. It was one not merely of indifference but of repugnance. So that's the important aspect of new religion invented by Luther, or led to this new invention of religion by the logic inherent in some of Luther's claim is that spiritual is absolutely pure. The secular is absolute darkness, and there is unfathomable gulf, and spiritual shouldn't deal with impurities of external world, because this would downgrade. So the Christian, as a secular person, will do whatever the secular authorities and secular arrangements will command, even if it is absolute darkness like capitalism. But then he or she will turn back into her own inner self and enjoy the purity of Christ. So that was a great combination, which is with us to this day. We'll continue that thing.